Hey Peter,
What's it
how's it
going?
going?
Hey, David, how are you?
I'm good. It's time for another episode of Call Me Data.
Indeed, it is. You know what, David? You know what I find somewhat amusing, other than I love your shirt. I have to always comment on the Aloha shirts. They're always interesting to me. Since we've started filming these later in the day, I am way more punch drunk. Just gonna say that.
Yeah, it's a
Put
little
that
hard
out
at the end
there.
of the day. All you need is a good strong cup of coffee. Got my upstate and chill mug. I'm ready
I
to go.
love that. I love that. Anyway, David, it sounds like we have another good podcast this week, another good chat like we always do. And
Yeah,
why don't we get to it?
yeah. No, I'm looking forward to talking about this. So I think it all started with a conversation that you had. So I'll let you replay that, and we'll kind of unpack it and talk about what it all means.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I mean, this is about agentic AI largely. Not trying to get too much in the weeds over here, but I had a really interesting conversation with a friend of mine who recently started at a software company. And it's an agent-based software company, obviously, which is mostly what you're seeing these days are they're basically popping up all over the place. If a company has software, they're agent enabling it. Otherwise, they're a company developing agents and the tools to manage agents. So we had a long conversation. We were just kind of all over the place on it, but in some aspects, it was really about: are the businesses ready for this yet? Are they really in a position to really kind of deal with this onslaught of change? And I think that's where we were talking a lot about that, and then how do you manage all these agents, and moreover, I think more importantly, how do you really prepare companies for this rate of change? I mean, what are the steps they need to take in order to get ready for this? And one final thought, and then I will stop there. And I think this, like I said, and him and I spoke about it as well, because we've been through a lot of changes in technology over the last 30 plus years or so. I've never, and you and I have said this many times, this is really different. And the rate of change is, I think, not only accelerating, and it's definitely accelerating. I think in most cases, the software companies are way, way, way ahead of where the businesses are in terms of they're ready to absorb this change. And I think, it's happening. How do you get there? And if you're a CEO, like, what do you do? So with
No,
that, I'll stop talking.
no, you're right. It's definitely happening. It's funny because I think that agents and agentic AI is simultaneously the most overhyped thing I've ever run across and the most quickly evolving thing at the same time. So it's real and it's overhyped.
Yes.
I was talking to someone in the venture capital community the other day, and they were basically lamenting the fact that most VCs only want to make investments that have agents in them somewhere, and it's become like de rigueur now that you have to like have an agentic component to any tool, any company, any software product.
Yeah.
And so it's easy to dismiss it as, just another hype wave, but I think it actually is real. And it's not only real, it's coming quickly. So I think your question is the right one, which is like, what does it really mean for companies? What can they do to be ready for it? So,
Right.
yeah. So should we
Right.
start with
No.
like trying to explore what agents are? And this is not going to be a simple two-line definition because it's a little bit of a hard thing to define sometimes. There's lots of different shapes and forms, and the definitions are probably still evolving. But when I say agent, what do you think of, Peter?
Well, I want to say one thing I want to bring up first before we even jump into agents, because they're all tied together. The concept of digital labor, i.e. agents. And I think that's another term that seems to be out there quite a bit lately. But what is an agent to me? I think, and it's funny, I was on a call too, and they were talking about agents, and I prompted, I said, well, what is your definition of an agent? Because you know as well as I do, it's all over the place.
Yeah.
Everybody's got their own definition. There's one definition where I say, well, an agent's a piece of software using MCP, which is the Model Context Protocol, on top of an API. Well, that's one definition. I don't think it's really the right definition. But agents really are, if you look at them or think about them, are pieces of software that are supposed to operate either semi-autonomously or autonomously. And they are using language models or artificial intelligence. So they are not, in the strict sense of the word, just pieces of software sitting on top of an API. They are not a web service. They are not an API tier. They're none of the above, though superficially they can seem that way. That's not what they are. They are meant to be goal-seeking and far more capable than a web service would be, and far more flexible, which I think is really the critical piece of information here.
Yeah, I think that's a great basis for a definition. I think you're right. Let's pick apart a couple of the things. Like I think the goal seeking is really important in distinguishing an agent from something else, because the way we all learned to write code was basically declarative, right? You'd say, here's the approach, the method, the algorithm, and you would write code to follow the algorithm. And agents don't work that way. Agents, you say, here's the goal, and the agent, I'll gloss over the details for now by saying the agent figures out how to reach the goal, right?
Right.
And in doing so, you're right, it's flexible, etc. The other interesting aspect of an agent to me is, and I think a lot of people I see are sometimes conflating agents with chatbots. An agent can interface with a human through a chat interface, but it doesn't have to. So agents and chatbots are not automatically the same thing. Agents also can be triggered by an event. It can be something that you pre-configure and it sits around waiting for something to happen. So it doesn't have to have a chat event. It could be a file appears, a event is detected on the internet. I mean, any number of things, right?
Right. No, 100%. And I was having this conversation with one of our engineers over the weekend, specifically about that, about having an agent respond to a series of events and doing something accordingly. A couple of things I think to keep in mind why they're different than just the old style web services or API layers. I mean, between Model Context Protocol and there's another one called A2A from Google, which is agent-to-agent communication, they basically have the sense of a shared memory as well. So multiple agents can share this memory space in an attempt to achieve a goal. So even though you might have an agent might do a subset of the work, whatever work they complete, they put into what's called the shared memory space, for lack of a better way of putting it, where another agent will then act on it and take the next step in the workflow and complete it. But they are flexible in the sense that they can respond to real world events that maybe weren't coded up. And I think that's important. They're very flexible in that sense.
Right. And I think the other thing that I think of when I think of agents, in addition to everything you said is, and you had a really key point, which is multiple agents working together, which is very much part of how these are being built today. And the other thing is, I'll say there's a layer of disintermediation between the agent and the API. There are still APIs involved somewhere in the process, right? Like agents still need to use APIs of other web services and other capabilities out there. But there's this concept of a tool that the agents aren't directly aware of the API. They're aware of a tool. And a tool might be, I can look things up on Slack. I can, make reservations on Resi or Grubhub, etc. So it's this idea of tools where the agent isn't aware of the API. The agent's aware of this sort of slightly more abstracted tool. And what's so cool about it to me, I always get a kick out of watching these things work, is the agent is making a game time decision, a real time decision about what tool to use and for what purpose. So as the developer of an agent, and I'm going to have to qualify developer later when in this conversation, but we'll say now as the developer of an agent, I'm not even aware of what tools it's going to use. I'm describing the process. I'm describing the outcome I want, the constraints, etc. And I let the agents decide what tools to use to reach my goal, which is so different than traditional programming.
Wow, and let's talk about that for a second. Let's kind of compare and contrast that. I think because you brought up an incredibly important point, and I also want to tie it back to the conversation I had with the engineer over the weekend. Yeah, they are goal seeking, but you think about traditional workflows, where maybe you have multiple systems that have to communicate and share information together. You, as a programmer, you essentially had to think about every potential flow. You had to code up every single flow in the workflow. And if something went wrong in that workflow and you didn't catch it, obviously it blew up. Or you caught the error, you threw an error, and somebody had to jump in and do it. Now, I think this is where agents are very powerful. You don't have to code up a specific workflow. You can, but you don't have to. And I think that's important because it could respond accordingly to real-world events that occur that you didn't think about. and then go make an adjustment in the workflow based on what it's getting in response to that. So you have a higher degree of flexibility than you ever would have had. And just to tie it back to one more concept, when we were, we're coding up a platform that involves a series of agents and the workflow, and like that workflow, or that, I shouldn't say workflow, we'll call it goal, needs to be coded in the text. Like you're describing it. You're not coding up code anymore. And that's powerful change because you can go into that file and you can change the goals very easily without deploying a whole new system.
It's really interesting. And I think, I was talking to someone about agents last week, and we were also talking about the fact that, as you said, that you're describing a goal, not the process to reach the goal. But maybe what people often don't realize is to do this well, you have to describe that goal and the constraints and how you recognize that the goal's done and in a lot of detail. And so this is maybe slightly broader than just agents, but I think a lot of people still don't necessarily realize that when you're creating a prompt, whether it's defining the goal of an agent or another prompt, it's not uncommon, at least for me, for that prompt to be, a full page or 2 full pages long. Like you have to put a lot of thought into explaining what you want. Now, not every time. I can certainly still do a quick and dirty prompt, but for sophisticated use cases, you shift your effort from how to do the work to really describing in as robust and precise a manner as you can what you want done.
Right. Right. Now you bring up I think an incredibly important point. And I think one that goes unspoken about, or not spoken about enough. But the real, it's funny because I think when AI first started kind of hitting the mainstream and everybody was talking about it and the whole concept of a prompt engineer, we poo-pooed it to death and said, oh, why is somebody getting paid all this money to write prompts when, that's English. We all speak English. But you think about it, and now it's like we'll all eat a bit of crow. When you think about it now, the more information you put in code into a prompt in a format that actually getting very specific and goal-seeking, it is extremely difficult to do that and do that well.
Yeah.
And having somebody who can articulate that is incredibly valuable, I would say.
It really forces you to think deeply about what you're trying to accomplish and how to articulate it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you said you equated agents with digital labor. So let's talk about that because I hadn't actually heard the term digital labor exactly before. So, but let's talk about what that means because that's a great concept.
No, and I think at its simplest definition, it's doing the grunt work that we all do on a regular basis. It's taking information out of files and putting it someplace else. Maybe it's creating a spreadsheet or doing some data analytics for you. And you might have an agent tool that does that for you. Basic business intelligence where you're analyzing some spreadsheets and you say, okay, let me give it to an agent, hand it off, and say, hey, I'm looking for when I'm going to achieve profitability. Go figure it out for me. And it'll come back and it'll actually give you a result. Yeah, that's digital labor. It's doing something that I would have done myself, probably more effectively than I would have done it myself, but it's doing it on my behalf.
Yeah.
Now, the question becomes, at what point do they get so sophisticated that you're actually doing more? It's like most technology. You move up the food chain eventually, and it's going to start slowly moving up the food chain and performing more and more sophisticated tasks that are much more traditionally, we'll say, done by humans as opposed to technical technology systems.
So, let's talk about that point. Agents are today capable of doing work that humans can do, right? Like,
yes.
It is legitimate to think of an agent like a digital employee of the company. Now,
right.
It's probably in most cases an agent is maybe more like an intern or a new hire, right? Like they can figure out basic tasks. They're not particularly super specialized, but you can tell them how to go and do things and they'll figure it out. And so I kind of think of them as like they're like a really good intern or a early career hire. So maybe better if they're writing code, right?
I'm going to dispute that a little bit, actually.
Okay.
And I don't disagree with you. I think in many cases that's absolutely true. But a lot of what we do, I mean, look, we've built this whole consulting firm on the concept of agents and using artificial intelligence to facilitate consulting and make people more scalable. So just in my own personal use, and your personal use as well, because I've seen it, I realize it's been a massive force multiplier for both of us. I look at some of the work that we've done, things that would have taken me a week, I now do in an hour. That's digital labor to me. That is really making, full use of the tools and getting a lot out of them.
Yeah.
Granted, there are much more they'll do in time, but I look at some of the things that anything from writing SOWs or writing decks or communications or coming up with plans or whatever it may be. I'm always amazed at the power of what we can do and how fast we can actually do it.
No, you're right. It's certainly growing quickly, and there's a school of thought out there. I'd be curious what you think about this. There's a school of thought out there that says, right now agents are helping the average worker, we'll say in a company, right? They're helping mid-level workers, but like the real value of an agent in this theory would be what you really want to do is find a way to create an agent that is a digital twin of your most valuable people.
Yes.
Maybe a digital twin of your CEO, right?
Yep.
Imagine you have a famous CEO, pick a well-known CEO, right? And if that well-known CEO had a virtually unlimited number of digital twin agents that could be spun up, that could walk, talk, and think. Well, maybe not walk, but talk and think. Similarly
not too far away either.
to that CEO. Probably not, right? What kind of power and capability would that unlock? So do you think that's ever going to happen?
So let's jump on that. You and I have spoken about that numerous times, primarily because so much of what we do is recorded. Conversations with clients or customers or whatever is in fact recorded. Everybody look, a Zoom records, they all record, you get transcripts and use them for your notes. But, again, let's not discuss the legalities, but just conceptually, when we write papers, when we write ebooks, when we write all this stuff, when we did our class, all that information is effectively our thinking. Just put down our messages on Slack, our text messages, our emails. That is a representation of effectively how we're thinking to a large degree. And there's other digital artifacts out there. It's not hard to take those digital artifacts, and the more you have, you start getting a picture of how Peter and David think. And it's not hard to now train a model on all this information and have a digital representation of how Peter and David think. And now you tie in one of the newer tools out there and you can copy our voices, copy our facial expressions, copy everything else. And, you don't know if it's somebody else or it's us. And that's,
There will come a day. There will come a day when we will create one of these podcasts, and at the end we'll reveal that it actually was our digital twins doing everything, and we just pop in at the end to say, "Hey, that was our digital twin."
That was honestly, we could do that today if we really sat down and did it.
All right. Well, there's a challenge.
There's a challenge. Yes.
And let's not tell anyone when we're going to do it. We'll just see when people notice that we replaced ourselves with our better looking digital twins or whatever we do. Okay, so it's I love the idea of moving up the food chain and having agents that can assist or even take on some of the work of more and more valuable employees. It also changes the nature of what those employees do, right? Like it changes you from doing work to describing work if you're creating an agent, and supervising work if you have agents at your disposal. That's kind of an interesting shift.
That's a really interesting way of looking at it. You're going to have these digital workers. So let's call these agents that are on your network. They're running. They have access to the right information. They're looped into the right systems. They have access to the right databases or whatever they need access to. And you're going to have an interface. Maybe an interface is a voice interface. Maybe it's a chat interface. Maybe it's something else. I don't know. But your interaction, I think, with the world and these systems is going to change because of these tools. Now, I can say, hey, I need to, perform the following set of work, do some analysis on all this information, based on that, make some purchasing decisions. Can you please go ahead and go do that? And then the agents go off and do what they have to do. They pull in the relevant information from the relevant systems and they make an assessment. They, analyze the information, and then call into the purchasing or supply systems and go, yes, I need 10,000 new screws or whatever it is that they have to order. And it's done. And I'm not making phone calls. I'm not doing anything. And I say, oh, go do that 2 o'clock in the morning when it's quiet.
Well, it's interesting because I think a lot of companies will rightfully start very slow and keep a human in the loop. But I do think that that human in the loop needs to know how to be the supervisor, right? You're not going to be an effective human in the loop just because you have a heartbeat and brainwaves. You've got to effectively manage and oversee what an agent is doing. So that'll be, I think, a growth area for some people.
Oh, I think it's a hell of a growth area. So let me ask you a question. I mean, just hypothetically, if you're a CEO or a CFO and you have this array of digital agents at your disposal, how do you think about your workforce going forward? What do you think about? And do you have the right, like, what mindset do you need to put the right controls or in place to manage the risk appropriately?
If I'm a CEO, I'm thinking about a bunch of things. I'm thinking about, do I have people who are systems thinkers, who can think about a process and who can take a problem or a process or an opportunity and break it down into these are the goals we want to achieve and explain it in a way that can be interpreted by agentic AI. I think that's super, super important. I think about, am I going to have the right kind of people with the right skills to be effective humans in the loop, to be effective supervisors of this? Because I'm certainly, for a low stakes decision, you might just let the agent run completely autonomously, but the more impactful the outcome of the task that the agent is doing, the more you want to have humans in the loop, sometimes at every step, sometimes only at the end, or various combinations. But those have to be the right humans with judgment, with an understanding of the process, with an understanding of the risks and the impacts, and they have to feel empowered to actually overrule or reject a suggestion, etc. And we've talked about this before. There's dueling interesting phenomenons. There's cases of people just never trusting AI, and you can give them and this was not just AI, has been a problem for all forms of analytics, right? You can give someone all the data points in the world, but if they just ignore it and do what they would have done anyway, you haven't created a beneficial change. But the inverse of that happens with AI, which is sometimes people are quick to abdicate their human judgment and say, oh, well, the AI said to do this and I'm just going to blindly follow it. Both of those are terrible. So you want a workforce of people who know enough about AI and have a strong enough sense of direction that they can navigate and coexist with agents and be the supervisors effectively.
So you bring up a whole slew of really good points and topics that could probably be discussed for hours on end. One of them being, and I'll start with my favorite, one of my favorites, is how does this change recruiting for employees for your company, or does it? And what type of individuals are you now looking for? And certainly maybe they're different than in the past, maybe they're not. I don't know. I don't know the answer. I'm just putting it out there right now, but it's a hypothetical, interesting question, I think.
I won't even try to tackle it right now, but what I will say that you've brought up for me is that being a supervisor has always traditionally been a few steps down your career sort of thing, right? Most fields, people start off as a worker and then a team member and then maybe a little bit of a team leader, and they grow into this management capability. But if you're joining a workforce that has agents in it and you're a human, you might find supervisory responsibility something you need to do on day one. So that has a ripple effect on how we train people, how we educate people, what sorts of skills are taught in universities, etc. It's a big change.
And I'll actually take a totally off the reservation type of a question. People treat systems, and this is well known actually, people will interact on social media and with systems very different than they will interact with a person in person. And
keyboard courage.
Absolutely. A lot of keyboard courage. And I think a lot of us noticed that. I noticed it during COVID, like when people started jobs during COVID, the relationship with your fellow employees was tended to be very superficial. It wasn't as deep. It's hard to get. I'm sorry. It's hard to get that deeper relationship. Now you have somebody that's coming out of college for the first time. Imagine managing digital labor, which is not a real person, and they're going to maybe treat these things. And I hate to say, applying human-like thoughts and principles to a piece of software. But I'm saying it doesn't take much. If you learn to manage when you're managing digital labor, and if things go sideways and you treat it like, I don't know, whatever you got to do, you scream and curse. And if you transition to managing real people, you haven't really learned the skills to manage people.
Oh, that's an interesting point. Yeah.
It's just, I think there's a lot of psychology that goes into this and just how it's fundamentally changing just the very nature of work. And agents, I think, take it a step further.
So that's a really interesting point. If I understand you correctly, you're saying that, if I were to start a new job and I'm managing a team of only agents, I could get away with, I could yell at them, abuse them, chastise them, give them unproductive feedback. And it doesn't matter that they don't have emotions, they don't have feelings. They're going to just keep doing their job and they'll take my feedback, but it doesn't matter how poorly, as long as they can understand what I mean, I can be rude and crude and whatever about it. And if I then carry those habits into supervising humans, I am going to be in for a rude awakening. Yeah.
Well, and it's not hypothetical. I mean, there's basis for this in studies, and just like I said, in social media, and those who are spending enormous time in front of the screen and not interacting with humans, that their ability to interact with humans is greatly diminished. And now you're putting those individuals into a position where they're not managing humans, they're managing agents, and then if they ever manage humans, it's like they don't have the skills to do it. So hypothetical, I think, maybe, but just something to think about. I think as you're a CEO, these are things to consider.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I guess I think about as a CEO too, and you just made me think about it, so I won't say I've ever thought about it before, but that is you also want your agents to get along with your people, which means you not only need to equip your agents with knowledge of your company, your business processes, the tools available, the goals you have, etc. You need to give those agents or the underlying models that drive those agents, you probably want to think about how to give them access to communications and documents and artifacts that will help them understand the culture of the company, the way the company works at a personal level, not just the business facts, but the interpersonal dynamics of the company, the culture.
So you bring up an awesome point, and I want to riff on that for a second as well. So most companies have their, we'll call it culture. Some they have a culture they aspire to, and maybe they have a real culture that's a little bit different.
Yeah.
I think what they put on paper in the the goals of the company, and this is what we are about, and we're nice to everybody, yada yada yada. But the reality is also very different because culture is very often driven by, the top manager, the CEO, and their culture and their personal culture tends to trickle down. And now, if you does this mean maybe you, imbue some of these models with some human-like traits so that they respond accordingly with the culture of the company, and now you have to tune these models appropriately? I'm just throwing it out there. It should seem you would have to.
I think you could and you should. I mean, you and I have talked to each other a lot in the last couple of weeks about over the last couple of months, how wildly divergent different models from different providers have become in terms of the way they talk to you, right? Like,
I know.
The way that, I won't name names, but the way one model talks to me and says I'm the most brilliant person ever lived, and the other model is all business, and, all sorts of differences. So it's clear that models, look, they don't have personality. We get it. Like, they aren't people. They aren't living entities, but they can, if I want to be accurate, I'd say they can mimic certain styles, personal styles, and you probably do want the models driving your agents to, in some cases, mimic or replicate the cultural values and the interpersonal styles that drive your company. Like that makes sense to me.
No, absolutely. Or at the very least, we'll call it the interface plane. The point where your employees are actually interfacing with these models should certainly be something that is representative of your culture. I would think. I think that's important. Otherwise, like anything else, if you're irritated at your model because being snippy with you, at some point you're going to go work someplace else.
Yeah, no, totally. Well, let me tell you the other thing I think is super cool about agents recently, and this has been something that's happening right now. I mean, this is sort of new stuff, which is think about it this way: if you hire a bunch of humans, let's say you hire people right out of university to start at your company, who trains them, right? People do. It's not the training department, right? People train them. The people doing the jobs train them, right? Now, look at here, but traditionally, software solutions, software products were not created by the people, they were created by the IT department, right? And we saw over the last couple of decades, we've seen this gradual rise of things, citizen data analysts and citizen developers, and with all of the, I hate to say vibe coding, but whatever you want to call it, all of the, non-developers using code generation tools to write codes and create little applications, we're seeing citizen software engineers sort of, or replicas of software engineers. Here's what's really cool about agents right now for me, and this is where I think it's going to be super powerful, and this is why I don't think there's a company out there that can avoid this. You no longer have to know anything about software to create an agent. Now, I'll clarify that before we go too crazy and say some of the more sophisticated agents that do sophisticated tasks, yes, at least today, you still have to be an AI engineer and understand many of these frameworks and tools to create them, right? You have to know what a model context protocol server is, maybe know how to set one up for your company, but what's amazing is there are new capabilities out there that allow an average person working at a company to create an agent with literally no more effort than they would put into writing a prompt for doing something else with an LLM. And they can literally, I've played with one of these, and you literally can say, create a new agent. It'll say, what do you want the agent to do? And you just start in plain English describing what you're looking for. And it might come back and ask you a few questions. Okay, are there triggering events? And are there conditions where you want me to abort? But you're just answering a few questions and typing out what you want. And the software platforms will define and then execute the agents for you.
Yeah.
And so you can create an autonomous agent that sits and listens for an event to occur and responds to that event, and put that out and have it working for you in 20 minutes. Now, not a super sophisticated agent, but you can do it in 20 minutes without touching a line of code as we typically understand it.
Right. It's mind-boggling. Oh, it's mind-boggling. It blows me away how much can be accomplished in a short period of time with some of these tools. And things that would have normally in the past required a software development team to do some of this work and go off and spec it out and write requirements and take 2 months, and now you have somebody who is not schooled in any of that, and they're doing something that is quite powerful very quickly.
So here's the cool thing about it, or the interesting thing about it. I haven't decided if I think it's good or bad yet, but it feels to me, and you may see it differently, but it feels to me like most of the interesting things that came along in the last year and a half in the generative AI space started with small groups outside of the main model builders creating ways to do things, right? Like the first RAG implementation I saw, the first toolkit for building RAG came from LangChain, I think. Was the first one I was aware of, right? So the point is you had these other projects that were coming up with different frameworks and different ways to do things. And even the very first agents were created out, these weren't created by OpenAI or Microsoft or Google. They were created by open source projects in other places.
Right.
What's super cool is, at least it feels like right now, with some of this agent creation, and especially the citizen generated agents, we're seeing the big tech companies try to take a leadership position. So that whole agent creation example I gave of a person just writing a prompt, you can do that today in Microsoft's Copilot Studio tools. And Google demonstrated at Google Next when I was out in Las Vegas a couple of months ago, demonstrated the Google Agent Space, which is their version of a similar environment and toolkit where non-developers can spin up, modify, and launch agents. So
It's amazing.
interesting because like the big tech companies are sort of trying hard to lead on agents instead of relying on individual innovators and then trying to package up what's been created by other people.
No, they are. I'm definitely seeing that as well. I think Agent Space, the one from Google, I think is actually, from what I've seen out there so far, is one of the more fascinating ones I think they've done. And again, it's not out there yet. It's still in preview. But it's from the likes of it, from everything I've read, it seems pretty powerful. And you're right. I think they're taking the lead on a lot of these, in a lot of this space, which I find interesting. And mind you, they didn't come up with, I think, all the protocols like MCP, but they are bringing it together under a nice umbrella and tying it all together very nicely. And I think that is incredibly important because there are a lot of companies out there now, especially in the agent space, coming up with all parts of managing agents, controlling the risk of agents, putting security layers on top of agents. All this stuff is coming out, and I don't know how interoperable any of it is.
Right.
If it is at all.
Well, that's where I think that the big tech companies, Google's Agent Space and Microsoft's Copilot Studio, and I'm sure others that I am less familiar with, what they've done that I think is really powerful is they've put controls around the agents. So
Yep.
you have agents that exist within your existing cloud infrastructure, and they respect or observe the entitlements of the people executing the agent. So if I run an agent and I have access to certain data, and you run the same agent and you have different access to different data, we're going to get different results because the agents are sort of inheriting our own entitlements and permissions. This is really important because at the end of the day, you wouldn't hire a new employee in the company and give them the keys to every data vault and let them go crazy. So that's important. And the second thing they're doing, I think, is also super valuable is making those agents shareable and discoverable.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So if I solve a problem with that agent, I can put it out there into the company and let others at the company create it, modify it, etc.
And use it. And I think that's really important. In the past, companies used to embark upon these programs to API enable all their data. And I never felt like it got the kind of traction it really deserved. Certainly not at most companies. Some companies, yes, and there were tools out there to, look at the API, see what data was available, see, the global dictionary of APIs. I feel like this is very different though. I think if you have something that completes a unit of work and does it very well, you're going to, because look, a lot of what we do is very similar amongst ourselves. You're going to, it's going to be used and used quite extensively, especially if the interface is very easy.
Yep. So no, I think that's very right, and it is different than just putting APIs on top of everything. I mean, APIs have their place. They're the tools that agents use, and often will use APIs to connect to services on the back end. You're right. This is far more powerful than it sort of feels like the fulfillment of the original promise of the API revolution.
Yeah, it does. So let me ask you a question. And you bring up an interesting point over here. If you're, again, I go back to you're a senior guy in the firm and you're looking at all this change in front of me and you're going, well, I have my people that have been doing this job. Where do I start? Like, what do you, like you and I, this is our job and we have a hard time keeping up with it. But if you're running a big business, $1 billion firm, and then trying to do some of this stuff, what do you do?
I think the first thing you do, and I think this is probably as important as anything else, is you put a person or a group of people in charge of figuring this out. And what I mean is, it is moving quickly. It is complicated. There are risks and downsides. You don't want to create agents that are rogue employees, etc. And there's massive upside. You need a team of people who are going to work on figuring out how are you going to identify the right place to deploy agents in your company, build and operate those agents safely and securely, and help your organization sort of learn to be an agent-supported digital organization. There's a name for it too that I forgot. I wrote it down the other day when I was at a briefing. It's the you know not autonomous, is the digitally optimized organization or something.
Right.
Catchy phrase someone came up with. But that. My point there is, it's not going to happen organically. You need one person or a few people who are going to focus on how to make this happen and how to make it happen safely at your organization. Everything else flows from that.
Right. No, and I agree with everything. I agree. I think you're absolutely correct. Let me, bit of a plug here. So we had put together a data and AI strategy. We'll call it a questionnaire. It's a couple hundred questions. Is that a good starting point? So this way you kind of get a good lay of the land internally first before you start even driving some strategy?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it is. I mean, this has to, my comment earlier a few seconds ago about it not happening organically is, if it's not organic, it's intentional. And if it's intentional, you need to have a strategy. And so, yeah, I think, if you have an AI strategy, God bless you, that's great. You should make sure it's accurate, it's up to date, it's robust, it's deep. If you don't have an AI strategy, you're going to need one, because otherwise you're just throwing things at the wall to see what sticks.
Yes.
Which is fun, but really inefficient, really dangerous, and can get very expensive.
Oh, very expensive very quickly and result in absolutely no gains whatsoever. And, it becomes a very expensive learning experience where you're not gaining anything. And I've seen this and you've seen this, and where firms have spent literally tens of millions of dollars hoping some of it sticks and nothing sticks. And it wasn't done with intention. It was done purely as a guessing game. Let's see what we can do. And when you wind up with nothing. And that is absolutely the wrong approach.
And please, if I'm about to offend you, I apologize. I don't mean this literally, but the hallmark of a lack of strategy is often some poorly directed innovation team, right?
Yes.
And it's a bunch of people who are trying to figure out how to apply some technology. They don't know what they're applying it to. They're just trying. And here's the thing. That innovation team is going to be having a blast. If you're an individual on the innovation team, it's fun. Right?
It's a blast.
You're getting paid to experiment and to learn new things and to expand your skill set. It's great. They're the happiest people in the company sometimes. They're also the most expensive, least productive team in the company sometimes.
No comment. Yes, so, I agree.
Right, now, I apologize if you're in a high performing team that has an innovation label. Okay, they do exist, but all too often, launching an innovation team is really a symptom of senior management abdicating their responsibility to have a strategy, and they're basically saying, "Go figure it out. Go see what happens. Maybe you'll come up with something."
And a bunch of engineers in a corner getting paid a lot of money to play with technology is not a way to figure it out. I can say that with absolute certainty. It is not the way to figure it out.
But it's a great gig if you can get it.
Well, it's an awesome gig when you get it. I know. Okay, no comment.
They're always very happy.
You have no day-to-day responsibility. What's wrong with that? I think look, these things, like you said, and they go back, have to be done with intention. And I think that's hard. And I think most organizations, it's a fine balance. You don't want, I hate to say, too much intention, because then you make it too complicated unnecessarily. There has to be a nice balance where you're achieving progress, moving the organization forward, slowly gaining experience that spreads out organizationally over time. But you have to find the right place to do that without having too many people and adding too much bureaucracy and too many opinions, because then nothing gets done. And I'm a big believer that you learn and you adjust, and fail quick was a phrase that I heard early in my career. It's better to fail fast and cheap than worry about, I can't fail, therefore I have to plan and you get nothing done.
No, I think you're 100% right. And it's no accident that the very first section of our AI strategy assessment that we go through with our clients talks about strategic alignment. And it doesn't just talk about, are you aligned right now? It's, do you have a process? Do you have a way of ensuring that your AI and data initiatives stay aligned to your business strategy? If you haven't cracked that, then everything else is going to be problematic.
Well, and I think I want to tie this back to agents because I think it's important. Like you and I, we go off on these. Actually, we go off. We talk about things that are highly relevant. But I think because of the nature of the technology and the speed at which it's changing and the kinds of questions things like agents bring up, you have to start talking about this stuff. And I think what it does is it exposes, because of the tech has gotten so powerful, it's really going to expose issues in an organization a lot faster because
Yes.
things are moving so fast.
Yes.
And so when we talk about this stuff, there's a reason. It is most organizations can get by with, I don't say not with this, just in general, with not doing something or throwing bodies at the problem or whatever it may be to keep going forward. This really kind of alters the calculus, I think at least, of how organizations operate. And you're not prepared for it.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting because suddenly the things that took up a lot of time and effort might be a lot easier and faster with agents. And you end up with, I guess the question is, what would you do tomorrow if you had a whole bunch of people who suddenly had more time to think about what they were doing? Do you even know what they're going to think about? Do you know what their objectives are? Do you know what to tell them to work on? So it's funny, like everything we've talked about, what do you do as a leader to be ready for agentic to hit your company? We haven't even talked about technology yet. We've talked about leadership and organizational issues because I think they really are the biggest barriers right now. I mean,
yes, 100%. And I agree. And I think it's funny today. Just for the hell of it, I googled how many CIOs report into the CEO, and not many. It's still very, tech is still viewed as a back office function, and I think that's much of the that dramatically hurts an organization. And CEO is about strategy and sales for the company, but you can't do strategy without understanding this technology because you're just missing out on everything. It's like you have to have your chief technologist or your chief AI architect, we want to call it, reporting into the CEO because so much of it is going to drive corporate strategy.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. I've said many times, your AI strategy is your business strategy. Your business strategy is your AI strategy. Like,
yes.
They can't be separate things. And everything else will fall in place. I mean, we could talk all day about you need to know what your data is and where it is. You need to have the appropriate classification so you can enforce security and privacy policies on your data. Pretty important, though, your data needs to be exposed to the cloud. Like, you don't have to be running all your apps on the cloud. You don't have to have all your databases full-time resident on the cloud. But for agents to work, you need, at the end of the day, you need to have a URL that can connect to your data and your processes, right? So it needs to be exposed to the cloud. And
yes, it does.
Just everything works through a URL. Nothing works without it. So if you're
I agree.
If you're running on-prem applications with no gateway to the internet to access the data or the functions of the apps, that's going to be a problem. Now, it's hard to think of very many organizations that haven't at least started on the journey of doing that. But if you haven't, that will slow you down.
No, absolutely. I think you're absolutely correct. And I know we've been going off on this for quite a while because I think you and I, once we start going down this, we can talk for a very long time.
Such a fun area. Yeah.
It's incredibly, it's intellectually fascinating, I find it. And so much of it is dependent, as are most things, are depending upon human nature. And I think that's the one place where certainly engineers struggle the most.
Yeah, it is, and it's so, I think the duality of the incredible power of agents and large language models in general to almost feel human because they understand, they get you, they understand what you're asking for and what you mean, right? But then at the same time, they can be so frustrating because if you use the wrong word or you change one word in a prompt, that can have a ripple effect and change everything about the way something behaves. So, they're both incredibly intuitive feeling, but also incredibly picky and sometimes unpredictable.
No different than humans.
S- let's
I got you speechless.
yes. No, let's. It's funny because we were talking the other day. I was talking with a client about this, and they were raising very valid concerns about how do you know an agent's not going to make a mistake. And I think we got into the topic of agents are imperfect. The real question is not how do you make an agent perfect. The question is how do you make an agent be continually better at a task than your humans?
Yes, yes. That's
Right.
the question. That's the $64,000 question.
I mean, it's the same question that people raise without getting into all of the messy controversy around self-driving cars. That is the advocates for self-driving cars are saying, hey, even if a self-driving car isn't perfect, if we can demonstrate this consistently and reliably safer than humans, isn't that a step forward?
Yes.
Right.
Massive step
So
forward. Absolutely. Yes. But we expect perfection. It's not reality.
yeah, and it's worth saying, like, banks call it a risk-based approach. I call it the bigger the impact. If something goes wrong, the more guardrails you want to put around it. So an agent
Absolutely.
that's an agent that's deciding when to reorder copier paper, you might need some fairly basic guardrails, right? As long as you're saying never order more than 10,000 cases at a time. If it makes a wrong decision, you're probably not in too much
Not in the
trouble.
world.
Right. But if I have an agent that is booking people to fly across the country on and booking complex trips for them, if I have an agent that is resolving customer service issues, the greater the outcome, the greater the impact of that agent, the more I want to be more guardrails and more humans in the loop and more caution is warranted.
Yes.
Right? At the end of the day,
Yep.
that's inescapable.
Yes. 100% agree with you. You're absolutely correct. So how do we wrap this up, David? Like, I know we've been going on for a little bit. Like, what is the one piece of advice you would give to somebody listening to us
I,
today?
I'm going to make mine real simple. I'm going to repeat what I said earlier, which is you need to do this and you need to put a person on your team in charge of it. You can't just expect it to happen organically. It will happen organically, but it will be total chaos and it may be dangerous. You need a person to own a strategy and drive the learning and experimentation at your company about how you're going to deploy agents. Be intentional.
Yeah. No, I think that is spot on advice. Um, I think
How
that is
about you?
really you have to.
What's your
No,
one
my
piece of
one
wisdom for someone?
my one piece of wisdom, I call it the don't be stupid. No, I think intentional. You have to be intentional. You have to think about this. It's not something that look, I will reiterate exactly what you said. I think you're absolutely correct. You have to be intentional and this has to be thoughtful. It cannot be an accident waiting to happen, which it will be if you let it occur organically on its own. And it will be the Wild West in your organization because there's a million tools out there that you really need to be thoughtful about this. Because if you're thoughtful and you do it right, you're going to get a level of gains and productivity gains that you never would have achieved any other way.
Yep. Yep. And it's real. You will see tremendous gains if you do it right. So
Yes.
don't be afraid.
Now, embrace the
Yeah.
risk.
All right. Hey, this was fun. A great conversation. I
Always.
love talking about this stuff. I love when we can wax a bit philosophical about the human machine interaction models and where this is all going. And the best part about it is nobody really knows, so no one can prove us wrong yet.
Now, you know what? 5 years from now, people will go look at the Peter and David show, and either we'll be retired on a beach someplace in the Caribbean on our boats, and we really don't care what anybody says, or God knows what else we'll be doing.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's that.
The only thing I'm confident about is most of what we say in 5 years, we'll look back and say, "Wow, we had no idea that was about to happen." Right? All the things that'll happen because if you rewind 5 years now, I certainly couldn't have predicted the types of things we'd be working on today.
No. Hey,
So
who knows? Maybe we're right all the time, and we'll look at as some, sages or prophets on the mountain. People will come to us, oh my God, Peter and David knew it all. Highly unlikely, but you never know.
I'm not holding my breath. But
You never know.
until next time, thanks for joining us on Call Me Data. And
Yeah.
Peter, always a pleasure.
David, always a pleasure, and thanks everybody. And again, any questions, any suggestions, any input, we'd love to hear about it. Please, find it, send it to us. We love your input.
And I love to hear from people who are doing real work with generative AI and especially agents. So yeah, we'd love to hear your stories, your lessons learned, your war stories, or whatever you want to share.
Please reach out.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks,
Take
David.
care,
Have a great day, everybody. Bye now.
Yeah. Bye bye.